Blake Strode.
Hey, Kayla Reed.
We are back.
We're back.
This is another episode of Under the Arch. We are still a podcast where we explore the issues facing our communities and the people fighting to transform them. I'm Kayla Reed, Executive Director of Action St. Louis.
And I'm Blake Strode, Executive Director of Arch City Defenders. And today we're just keeping it rolling with our Season 6 special mayoral candidate series.
It is a special series. For those who are just tuning in, go to our YouTube page, watch the previous episodes. We are actively talking to the candidates who are running for mayor of the city of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. We've described this as sort of a change to the way we've historically done things, because in previous years, we've actually held debates where we would have all the candidates on stage together, answering questions about their platform. And this year we wanted to do something a little different, where we actually sit down one-on-one with each candidate, ask them about their platform, questions that we know the community wants to hear responses to, and then questions that matter to our organizations and the work that we do. And so that's why we're doing this structure. That's why we're on camera, and excited for this guest today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. We are going to, of course, run through some disclaimers at the top. We're still going to do that in all these conversations, just to remind everybody. And so first, we just have to remind that we are nonprofit 501c3 organizations. We believe strongly in electoral justice. I think that's in the description of Action St. Louis. Yes. However, on this podcast, we don't endorse candidates. We don't oppose candidates. And we won't be telling you what we think of the answers, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise. That's for you to decide. To that end, we'll be approaching these interviews with the same structure. If you watch all of the interviews, you will see that we will always start with some introductory background, then some questions about the specific candidate platforms and histories. We'll also take a look at some specific critiques that have been in the public and in the news. And then finally, some questions, as Kayla said, on issues very close to our organizational work. And we're recording all of these interviews before any of them are released. So no unfair advantage. Nobody got a heads up. Everybody's on a level playing field. And then finally, we do have one special disclaimer today, and this will tee up who our guest is today. Because when you are the sitting mayor, some special things apply to you. And so I have to note that Arch City Defenders is in litigation with the city of St. Louis, which of course the mayor represents. And there are a few issues that are very close to our work that we won't be diving in as they relate to active litigation, because I like my job and want to keep it. And we're going to keep this conversation contained outside of active litigation. So you may, if you have expectations about us diving into that legal work, that's not going to happen today. So we just wanted to note that at the outset.
All right. Well, want to make sure you protect your law license.
Absolutely.
We want to keep our lawyers. Until that end, we're going to get started with our guest. So we want to introduce to the Under the Arch podcast, Mayor Tishaura Jones.
Hi there.
Welcome.
There's people in the room.
Welcome back.
I'm going to clap.
Yes.
Clap. All right. So welcome to Under the Arch podcast. We're happy that you were able to join us. We know it is campaign season, and I'm sure your calendar is full of talking to people in different settings. So thanks for making space on this afternoon. So we're going to dive right into the first section, which is really just an opportunity for you to share with our listeners who you are.
Yes. Well, again, it's great to be back. I know it's been a while. It's actually been too long since we've had an opportunity to talk. I am the 47th mayor of the city of St. Louis, first Black woman to serve in this position. And as my mama always says, heavy is the head that wears the crown. So 4 years later, I would say I'm stronger and wiser. However, I think that it is necessary for your listeners to know that when I took over in 2021, the city was in crisis mode. We were in a hiring freeze, trash wasn't getting picked up, 911 calls weren't being answered, and homicides were at an all-time high. 4 years later, homicides are 40% lower, or 40% lower than 2021. Youth-involved shootings have been cut in half, as well as 911 calls are being answered 60% faster. So I would say we're making progress. Also, I know an issue that is near and dear to your heart is the workhouse is closed and has been empty ever since. And soon I hope we'll be able to tear it down and make use of that site into something productive for the community. We have had some challenges with the jail, but we are making progress there as well. When I became mayor, the locks didn't work. It's not a jail if the locks don't work. And we've been able to put in about $19 million to do some, to make sure the locks work and some other things. And we're making progress on transportation infrastructure projects, rebuilding North St. Louis, putting money where it's needed most in communities that haven't seen investment in decades. Some, communities haven't seen a mortgage generated in those communities in 10, 20 years. And so we're building new homes, we're expanding housing opportunities, we're expanding opportunity period. And we have a lot more work to do in my second term, because we can't fix 70 years worth of neglect and 70 years worth of broken systems in just 4 years.
Yeah, so you sort of spoke to, why you want a second term. When did you decide that you wanted a second term as mayor?
I always wanted to do at least 2 terms. I knew that this work would take at least 10 years. And so terms are 4 years, so at least 8 years. And I knew that to have any real lasting sustainable change, you have to be there for at least 8 years. And so I committed myself to that. And I'm hopeful that the voters see that as well as we go into the rest of this election cycle. But in order to really get further down the road on the things that St. Louis needs, you can't change your leadership every 4 years, or else you're not going to get anywhere.
All right, so we want to really dig into your agenda and priorities for St. Louis. And to be honest, we start sort of for this segment really just looking at campaign websites and looking at what the stated priorities are. And your platform is organized differently than the other candidates, to be honest, in that it's not as issue-based as your challengers, I think. And you have things like saying yes to investment in you is one of the categories, or the people's government ready for the 21st century. So we're going to drill down still on a few of the components that are in there. But at the outset, just curious in hearing from you how you conceive of your own platform. If someone is visiting your website and trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to do, why it is you want a second term, what do you want them to take away in terms of your priorities?
Well, I want them to take away that we are trying to build a St. Louis that's safer, healthier, and stronger for everyone, and give everyone an opportunity to thrive, no matter the color of their skin, the background, who they love, how they worship, or any identity they hold. Those were the things I said in my first campaign, and those things still reign true. And we've been able to invest in things that we talk about, that I talked about in the first time I ran. I opened an Office of New Americans so we can help our migrant community, which is our largest growing community in the region. St. Louis is one of the top cities that is growing in migrant communities, and we want to make sure that we're connecting them to jobs, housing, and everything they need to thrive. I talked about transforming public safety and focusing on the alternative response. Our Cops and Clinicians program is up and running. We have a non-police response called a crisis-centered response, or community-centered crisis response, or something like that. CERT is what we call it, which is a non-police response for people who don't need an officer-involved response. I believe that our officer-involved shootings have been cut down dramatically. When we were doing this in 2021 and even 2017, St. Louis was tops in the nation for officer-involved shootings. And we do more community policing. Our chief, as well as our leadership, are at all neighborhood meetings, making sure that people know what the crime stats are for their particular neighborhoods, and that information is online. We're very transparent. We have a crime tracker that people can track crime within 24 hours on our police website as well. And our Office of Violence Prevention, which is the thing that I am most proud of because it engages with communities and meets people where they are. It funds community organizations because we believe that people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so community organizations like Diamond Divas and the T and Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, all come together once a month at our kickbacks, where we table in a gym and have music and food and fun. But also, it's a learning experience for the communities that we're in. And I try to make sure that I'm at just about every one of them so I can be present in community and meet people where they are and kiss and hug babies, which is my favorite thing to do. But our violence prevention work has really made a difference, especially because I'm a mom and my son is 17 now, and our youth involved shootings are down by 50% as a result of some of that work.
Yeah. So in one of your categories, you talk about sort of regardless of any identity you hold, you can succeed. And you talked about that as a part of your platform in 2025 and part of your, platform in 2021 when you ran. You talk about racial equity. You talk about immigrants and refugees, disability rights, protecting the LGBTQ community. Why do you see this as something worthy of, as a standalone priority right now?
Well, because as we see coming from the federal government, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is under attack. And I am making sure that St. Louis is always going to be a welcoming city for the categories that you mentioned. We're going to lead on racial equity. We're going to welcome immigrants and migrants in our community. We stood up the first LGBTQIA plus advisory board and commission to take a look at our policies and procedures through that lens, and have been able to make some strides there as well. We want to make sure that people feel welcome here, that if St. Louis is their home. I feel like the moment you land in St. Louis, wherever you come from, you're a St. Louisan.
I mean, as you said, there's this federal purge of all things DEI right now, and there's a lot of commentary that says, that's happening because people are fatigued with so much talk about identity. Are you worried about that? Do you think that's true in St. Louis?
No, I don't think that's true in St. Louis. I feel like St. Louis has more recently become a more welcoming community and willing to push back on efforts to divide us and for us to shy away from issues that are related to diversity, equity, inclusion. And also the other thing that we did, one of the first things we did was we reinstated the Deputy Mayor of Racial Equity. And so that person is actually serving in 2 roles right now, but that is important enough to us to make sure that we have someone in our office that's making sure that not only they're doing it in our office, but looking at all of our city departments.
Yeah. So we want to shift to a second priority that you list. So it's not second, it's one of the others, on children, youth, and families. You discuss reproductive rights, right, which we passed as voters in November, and we're watching the Missouri State Legislature attack
Try
that.
to dismantle it, right.
You talk about things like education and things like recreation. To those sort of last two, in your opinion and under your leadership, what can the city do to support early childhood and youth needs and ensure we have quality public schools?
Well, I really wish we would have passed the RAMS bill, or the Board of Aldermen would have passed the RAMS bill, because that had about $30 million set aside for early childhood education. However, through the ARPA funds, we were able to fund some of our grants for early childhood education providers, and I got to visit several of them, and they told me how those grants really made a difference with them being able to close or stay open. And then on our rec centers, we have put a lot of our ARPA funds into fixing some of those long-term capital needs that needed to happen in our rec centers: roofs, HVAC systems, new floors, and build digital labs in some of our rec centers as well. And we've been able to expand Wi-Fi in parks, really attacking digital literacy, because we saw that during the pandemic, a lot of our families didn't have access to Wi-Fi. And so now in 9 city parks, and soon on Martin Luther King from Grand to the city limits, you'll be able to have free Wi-Fi in the city.
Great. So you referenced the RAMS bill there. We definitely want to talk about that, but we're gonna circle back around to that. First, let's talk about the putting the public back in public safety. We've heard that phrase many times over the years. As you said, that was part of your 2021 campaign, still part of your 2025 campaign. And the first sentence on that page of your campaign website says, our current system of policing is inefficient and ineffective. And you have, various sort of references in there to dispensing with this kind of narrow, tough on crime notion,
right,
and addressing root causes of violence. But we've also seen in the first term, when we look at just by the numbers, we have seen an increased investment in policing in terms of just sheer dollars in the budget that goes toward policing year over year. That's increased almost every year. The first year there was a cut, but then it was sort of offset mid-year, and we've seen increases in subsequent years. Police officers have received pay raises along with other city employees, but larger
Right.
pay raises than other city employees. We also have seen more a sort of uptick in both some private policing forces in the city, as well as private funding of public police operations in the city, both some downtown program funded by the Police Foundation and part of the chief's salary paid by the private police foundation. So when you look at that, how do you square the ideas that are part of your campaign platform with that reality that we've seen play out over the past few years?
Well, I think the one thing we haven't mentioned is that we've also increased our funding to alternatives to policing as well. The Office of Violence Prevention, which was initially funded through ARPA funds, is now a permanent part of the city budget, funded through through general revenue and other user taxes. And I made that very clear to the budget director that yes, this first year was going to be through ARPA, but every year after that is going to be a part of the regular budget. And that is crucial to supporting the 30 plus organizations that we support on the ground and grassroots level. We've also increased funding for our cops and clinicians program and our non-police response. So just as there are increases on the police side, there have been increases on the prevention side as well. And then also, we are part of a regional crime initiative called Save Lives Now that I was able to spearhead as chair of East West Gateway Council of Governments, which is all of the basically county executives on both sides of the river of our region. So the 3 counties in Madison and the 5 counties in St. Louis, plus me as the only city. And we are dedicated to reducing crime, reducing homicides and violent crime or gun violence by an additional 20% over the next 3 years through focused deterrence, through cognitive behavioral theory or therapy, as well as trusted messengers. And all of those things are non-police responses that we are funding. We're funding part of it, and then others are funding, and we're getting private funding for that. So just as we are, increasing on one side, we're also increasing on other sides as well.
Okay.
So in that same section, you explicitly called for decarceration in your platform. But the city jail population has been increasing, slow but steady, over the past 3 years. So do you think that needs to change, and what's your plan to change it?
Well, I would say that our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee has become a lot more active. We didn't have we had someone in that role that left, and our new director in that role has been laser focused on decreasing our jail population. But as you well know, I don't control the courts, and our jail population will decrease as fast as the courts will allow it. There are people who have been there for more than 5 years, which is unacceptable. They need closure. Those families that are affected need closure in one way, shape, or another. So we have suggested a sort of rocket docket for those who have been there for a long time, because it's time for closure. And also, we're working with the new circuit attorney on bringing back diversion programs, as well as working with our violence prevention efforts to try to prevent people from going into the system altogether.
When you think about decarceration and your role, do you think about it as a coordination role? I mean, you talk about the courts, you talk about the CJCC, you talk about the circuit attorney's office. Like, what role do you see for yourself in helping to create that culture of decarceration? Yeah,
I think our role is a coordination role, because we don't control the courts, we don't control the circuit attorney's office, and the jail is we just house people while they're waiting for that next step in the criminal justice system. But while we are housing them, we are taking a shift. We just hired a new corrections commissioner we're taking a shift to make sure that while people are in our care, that they come out better than they went in. So we're going to be deploying several programs and several things that our detainees haven't had access to in previous years.
Okay. Sorry, that was a follow-up, but let me ask one other public safety question, which is, you're now almost through a full first term. What is the biggest challenge after, with the experience of the past 4 years, when you think about administering public safety policy in St. Louis? What's the biggest challenge you've encountered?
I would say the biggest challenge is changing people's minds as to what public safety is and is not. There are a lot of people who still think as public safety as solely just the police, and they want to see more police in their neighborhoods. And I try to explain to them that the other things that we're doing on the prevention and intervention side lead to our police being able to just do the jobs that they're trained to do in our academies and not suffer from mission creep, because I think that once mission creep happens is where we see the problems happen, right? Once police are called to be a mental health counselor, they don't have the training to understand when someone is in crisis and doesn't need that response. And because we have shifted away from, or not shifted away, I would say added another muscle there with our alternative response methods, people don't necessarily see that all the time, and they think that that we're not focused on public safety when actually we are, but just in different ways. So getting people used to the different ways that we approach public safety and how public safety is more than just police. It's being safe in your home. It's being safe if you have mental health issues. It's being even safe if you have substance abuse issues. And not having to be killed because of that. I think people just don't see the shift there. And this shift isn't just happening in St. Louis. Every city where you see a decrease in homicides and a improvement in the public safety of their residents, these are the things that they're investing in.
Yeah, so one of the other sections of your platform we want to dig into is what you call the people's government, right? And so can you speak to your plan around equitable taxation and revenue generation and how you see charter reform connecting to that?
So our charter reform process, I would say, didn't yield a lot of change. We got the transportation and the Department of Transportation and the ability to charge more for vacant buildings and for vacant or negligent property owners. I would have liked to have seen some different changes that affect, I would say, the day-to-day work of the mayor's office and how things work. For example, the personnel department doesn't report to me. I'm responsible for appointing the personnel director, but that person doesn't report to me, and neither does the staff. And we've seen some improvements in personnel. However, our city government only works as well as the people that we hired to run the government. And if we can't get people in the jobs, then services fail. And that's been, I would say, one of the more difficult pieces that we've had to address over the last 4 years. There are, I would say, when we did get the ARPA money, we wanted to make sure that it was a people-driven process. So we had our community advisory board that gave us input. We did surveys. We saw the same thing with the Rams money, and we're able to put together bills that address what the people wanted. And I think that we were successful in that. They wanted investment in small business and infrastructure and investment in people, and we were able to deliver on most of the things that the people wanted.
Yeah. So connected to that, if I can ask a follow-up.
Go for it.
So we do talk about staffing. We have a question about staffing, and everyone knows that an efficient, a team requires a strong workforce, and so government even more, right?
Right.
Every candidate talks about how the city is understaffed and there has been turnover in key positions in your administration. How do you plan to address staffing shortages if you are elected for 4 more years?
Well, I think we just talked about that. We have to make sure that personnel is hiring people, and we also have to change the culture in some of our departments. Because there are people that get hired and don't stay for 6 months. There's a lot of turnover, and part of that is because of the culture. And so what are we doing internally to address the culture of how supervisors treat their subordinates, about how benefits are administered, about people getting paid on time? These are a whole host of reasons why people leave. And why our turnover is so high, and we have to address that. However, again, personnel doesn't report to me. We work well with personnel, but we need them to do a little better. Yeah. I won't even lie.
And do you think that that's a solve for it, to move personnel sort of directly under the mayor's office?
That's what I asked for, because every other department that's obviously not independently elected does report to me.
So speaking of processes that involve a lot of people in city government, transparency is one of the important elements of this people's government section of your platform. And there's been public reporting about records not being properly kept, sunshine requests not being answered to and not being answered, responded to in a timely fashion. What do you think the issues with transparency have been over the past few years, and how would you address those in a second term?
I think the number one issue is that we have a whole host of different systems that don't talk to each other, and then and each department has its own sort of sunshine law coordinator, and it's a maze of trying to get information, even for us inside of the system. It's a maze to get access to that information. We are slowly moving to systems that talk to each other. We've been able to install software for payroll and finance, as well as personnel. But you're talking about when I came in 2021, we were still using typewriters and triplicate forms. So a lot of this information is still in paper in somebody's desk drawer or file cabinet. So getting to that level of true transparency is going to take some time, because we are still dealing with people going from paper to computers. And so scanning all of that information is going to take a lot of time, as well as getting everybody on the same system.
Just as a follow-up to that, so we sort of understand the part of like bringing things into the 21st century, is what your website says, that city has been operating on, typewriters. I typed my first paper in the 4th grade on a typewriter and begged my parents to get a computer. I couldn't imagine going to work and using a typewriter every day. But also inside of just the last, 3.5 years of your administration, there was sort of almost what felt like obstruction to transparency from, the jail coordinator, the city counselor's office, where, people are sort of not receiving answers to what's happening around issues that they really care about. And so beyond the archaic infrastructure that your team is working to update, how are you navigating people's perception that your administration is not responsive to those types of requests?
Well, for example, with the jail commissioner, we now have a new one. We went through the process to find someone who has great experience and great track record in improving jail facilities. And so we are confident in his ability to turn things around over there. I can't speak for the city councilor's office and everything that goes on there. Honestly, I try to stay out of Sheena's way. But I only speak with her about once a month or so to be able to get an update on what she's working on.
So I'm gonna take a turn into one other section, which is around sustainable, equitable, and intentional investment. We said we were coming back to this. The Rams settlement.
Settlement money.
What's the
you
noun there?
watch it?
Drama, debacle,
Chaos,
whatever it is.
collapse.
Where are we on the Rams settlement spending? What do you want to see happen with the spending of those funds, and how do you think we get there?
Well, initially, my thoughts were to hold on to it for a minute because we didn't know what was going to come from the federal government. This was, I think, at a time when, Biden was running. He was low in the polls. Trump was running. We didn't know what was going to happen in November. And my initial proposal was to put it into an endowment fund and live off the interest. And so then we got these two competing bills, and then the bill sponsors got together and came up with a compromise, which I supported. And then everything fell apart at the board. And then now we're back to now we're back to the Rams money continuing to earn interest in an interest-bearing account. But given the first few weeks of Trump's presidency, we've seen how our federal dollars are going to be at risk. So having this pot available, especially when we know that about $300 to $400 million of the city's budget comes from the federal government. Now, of course, this isn't enough this is only enough for a year, but we just don't know what we don't know. And so I'm confident that maybe we should take a pause just to see what's going to happen at the federal level, to see, because some of these programs may cease to exist, and we'll have to rework our budget to see how we continue to fund certain positions. The Department of Health, for example, 50% of their budget, especially people, is funded through the federal government, through NIH and other health-related departments. I think we're in a really precarious position right now regarding our federal funding, and so taking a pause isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. So just like as a follow-up to that, there seem to be there are always factions at the Board of Aldermen if you watch Friday. And I think every person in the city of St. Louis should watch one Friday at the Board of Aldermen, maybe in person, maybe with popcorn. But regardless of that.
Can we sell popcorn upstairs?
If it makes the city a profit, you should, But there was sort of this faction around infrastructure versus people, direct investment into sort of historically neglected communities versus downtown. And you saw people moving across those spectrums in real time, and sort of some disorganizing happening, right? And so when the Board of Aldermen convenes again after the April election, how do you get that message across? That's hey, we actually need to sit and wait to get a clear picture of what's happening when there feels like there are these, sort of corporate entities, community organizations, special interests, and all these sort of things that are being described to the general public are competing for this one pot of funds.
Yeah, those are just the difficult conversations we'll have to have. We'll see what the landscape looks like in April, and it could be totally different than what it looks like today because it changes every 12 hours at the federal up there in D.C. So I think those are conversations we'll have to have based on what our federal landscape looks like in April. We know that by that time, most of the cabinet positions will be in place and hopefully confirmed by the Senate. And those cabinet members will have a couple months up under their belt to see how they're going to lead these particular departments. In my position at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I'm a trustee, which means I'm in executive leadership. We've had and tried to have conversations with the White House Intergovernmental Affairs Office, and we've been successful there. But we're also taking a wait-and-see approach especially when it comes to funding. There are pots of funds that we are really concerned about, CDBG dollars being one of them, because that has bipartisan support, and St. Louis gets a healthy allocation of CDBG funds. But again, we don't know what's going to happen with the other pots. So,
in these funding decisions, what should be the role of the St. Louis business community? Greater St. Louis Inc. Played the huge role in shaping one of the two competing proposals, and then at the table for this compromise. What do you think the role of a Greater St. Louis Inc. should be in that kind of policymaking?
I think they should be in a supportive role, but not dictating what we should be spending our money on.
Okay.
Yeah. So, when you came into office, there was St. Louis City got a huge pot of resources from the federal government, known as the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA dollars. Mm-hmm. So what are you most proud of regarding, how those dollars were allocated, and how do you respond to criticism about implementation of some of your programs, specifically like the Northside Grant Fund?
Well, I'm most proud of the community process that we used in order to craft the bills that eventually were passed to spend the funds, because I feel like they were crafted with the community in mind. And because we did that community process, I guess we're 6 months to a year into having the funds until we actually until we passed those bills to get them out in community. I am proud of our guaranteed basic income program. I'm proud of the funds where we've been able to give people actual money, mm-hmm. right? Our DCA program, direct cash assistance, which was early on, and then our guaranteed basic income program, and able to meet families who were directly affected by that. Most of them Black single mothers like myself. Able to just take a breath, just to take the weight of the world off of their shoulders for a minute, and just focus on their kids and focus on being a mom, which is really hard to do when you're out there fighting the world. I'm proud of, when we talk about the Northside business program, the grant program. There were a lot of starts and stops, primarily because the first iteration of that program, we were, I wouldn't say cited by the federal government, but we asked the federal government, hey, we've got this provision in here that requires a letter from the board, from the alderperson of your ward. And they were like, yeah, we shouldn't do that. And so that's why we had to go back and pass a different bill, and that was almost a year later, and have people go through and reapply. So that made the process even longer. And then, just I would say we extended the deadline a couple of times because we were working with companies that had never applied for federal dollars before. Didn't know how to apply for grants. I mean, some of the applications, when we asked them, what was their budget, they literally wrote in anything I can get. And so it's like, well, right. Let's work together to see what you need. And this program was never a program to fund everything that businesses need. It was supposed to be part of a capital stack. So if you got $15,000 from here and another $20,000 loan from here, and you needed another maybe $50,000 to complete your stack, then this was that program. It was like almost like a last dollar or a completion of your capital stack program, or to add to money you were already getting. And I think that was the misconception in the community about these funds. And we received over $400 million in applications for $34 million in grants. Mm-hmm. So the need is humongous. And if I had $400 million, obviously we would have granted that. But when you have a small, finite amount of funds and such a large amount of people with applications, they're going to be winners and losers. And that's the most unfortunate part in this program.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move to a segment of our conversation that in the debate format, we call this In the News. And really what it is an opportunity to name and allow you a chance to respond to some specific critiques that have been lifted up. So first, one of the, over the course of your first term in office, one of the most common critiques that we've heard, and it kind of comes across different political ideologies and factions, identities, is a perception that you're resistant to criticism, that you don't respond well. Sometimes this goes into commentary about how you engage with people on social media, that people get the sense that you don't want to hear negative feedback about things that are happening in your administration. So I want to offer you a chance both to respond to that generally, but I also specifically want to ask you to name something that you think was a mistake in your first term or that you would do differently if you could do it again.
So on the, I'll talk about, how I respond on social media. A lot of times I feel like what I'm doing is giving the truth or giving the facts. So there's a lot of misinformation and much of it is spread on social media. And so if I come off as a little snarky, it's because I'm just stating the facts. This is what's true. This is what's not. And that, and like who was it? I say what I said. I'm going to fight back, or I'm going to respond when there's misinformation out there about what we're doing. And I would say a mistake that I made in my first term, the recent snowstorm, we didn't ask for help or pivot fast enough. Now, granted, it was it was a snowstorm that we hadn't seen, a type that we hadn't seen in a while. Typically, when it snows here, it melts a few days later as we're preparing for the snowstorm that's about to come in a couple days after we're filming this. And I would say also we failed to set expectations because people wanted their residential streets plowed, and it's never been a policy of the city to plow residential streets because it could further damage cars or snow them in. And we had up, almost 9 to 12 inches of snow, depending on where you are. So we've learned from that. We've contacted other cities to see how they respond to snow. Looked at our own plans and found that they were outdated, discovered that they were outdated. We had been using the same plan for many years to respond to snow. And we're going to make sure that we have all of the things in place so this doesn't happen again.
Thank you. And for the record, I say what I said was Nene Leakes, one of the all-time greats. Sorry, Kayla, go ahead.
I think our base knew that. But if you didn't, yes, I said what I said. So you mentioned part of what our next question is in the news responding to the critique, and which is about just sort of city services, and all of your opponents this is a talking point that they're using, right? And this is one of their positions, and they sort of all say it the same, like returning back to the basics, or improving city services and infrastructure. And you just talked about the snowstorm, so don't need you to circle back on that. But other city services like street paving, trash pickup, what do you say to people who are concerned that you're overlooking the importance of the delivery of those basic services?
We are absolutely not overlooking the delivery of services. It's just as we were talking about at the start of our conversation about hiring. Hiring is difficult. When I came here in 2021, we were still using typewriters. So, you would apply for a job on the city's website. And then what would happen in personnel is they would print that off and then type it on a card and then file that card. And we don't know what happened to that card, right? It took up to 9 months to get a call back
from the city.
Right. And I don't know about you, but I'm not waiting 9 months for a call back when I'm looking for work. By the time you call me back, I've been working for 8 months somewhere else. And so we have been super focused on improving the technology in personnel and reducing the steps that it takes from the time someone applies to the time that they are walking in the door for their first day. But let me say this, people who've never managed anything think that they can change everything. And none of my opponents have managed large budgets or hundreds of people. Maybe Andrew Jones, but we're not going to talk about Andrew. But when you have never managed billion-dollar budgets and thousands of people, you think you can come in and change everything. And it's not that easy. If it were that easy, everybody would do it. And if it were easy, absolutely we would have hired people to stay in these positions. The turnover, the culture, those are also things that happen on a day-to-day basis that the mayor is not even involved in. The culture in some departments that has allowed to exist leads people to only stay here for less than 6 months. Like, we have a hiring bonus in the trash department, the refuse department, at $3,500 if you stay 6 months. Guess how many people have actually earned that bonus? 0. So there are some really big culture changes that have to happen on the local level, and that doesn't happen in just 2 to 3 or 4 years. Those things have been allowed to exist for decades, and these are things that we are still working hard to change, but it's going to take some time. But we have 55 routes. And on a good day, we have 40 drivers. And then those drivers work overtime to then go back and pick up the trash that they didn't pick up on the first route. Forestry, parks, and a lot of our pay doesn't also keep track with the private industry. A refuse driver can make $75,000 working for a private operator. They can't make much more than maybe about 55, 60, maybe 40, 50,000 working for the city. So our pay hasn't kept up, and we can't keep up with private industry unless we decide we're not just going to pick up trash anymore and pay people $75,000. So there are a lot of different. It's nuanced. There's a lot of different things that have to happen, and you're dealing with a budget that you have to pay for everything. So again, it's easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize when you've never had to run it yourself.
Okay, so we're in the home stretch of our conversation, turning towards some
fourth quarter. Eagles up by 37. Sorry, I had to say it.
So now you know this is on the other side of the Super Bowl. So we're going to turn to some specific priorities of our organizations, starting with one that you named. I think 30 seconds into this conversation, you talked about the workhouse and having emptied out and closed the workhouse, or at least that it's slated for permanent closure. There, of course, was a community-led re-envisioning process that you commissioned, produced a report and a set of recommendations. So tell us what you see coming down the line for the workhouse.
We do see some sort of public art or memorial for that property. We are no longer pursuing any plans to use the building in any way, shape, or form. Like I said, we're going to demolish it. Right now, we're in the process of the environmental study to make sure that when we do tear it down, we don't put asbestos and other harmful things in the air. Because as the facility has sat vacant, people have broken in and have stolen every valuable thing out of it. So we have to clean it out and then tear it down.
Okay. So the next question is also very important to our organization, which is about renters and renters' rights. So St. Louis has a housing problem, both in stock and affordability. Many renters are rent burdened, and the new housing that is being built is just completely unaffordable. What's your plan to increase access to affordable housing, and how will you invest in pro-renter legislation that has passed the city of St. Louis, like right to counsel and the impacted tenants fund?
Right. We did fund, I believe, through ARPA, the initial right to counsel, and we'll be looking at how we fund it in the foreseeable future. Also, I announced a moonshot goal at our October business luncheon to build 10,000 new units in the city of St. Louis, half affordable and half market rate. One thing we have not done a good job of in the city is building more affordable housing. And also on the housing front, we are shifting our focus related to helping our unhoused from a shelter-based model to a housing first-based model. And the other sort of regional collaboration I've been able to shepherd as chair of East West Gateway was with our regional leaders related to taking care of our unhoused, because the burden has been falling on the city of St. Louis to take care of the entire region's unhoused, and that's not fair, nor is it sustainable. So we've gotten together as a group to also with funders, the other regional COCs, to develop a plan to shift to a housing first model to eradicate homelessness or chronic homelessness in the region.
So we want to ask specifically about homeless services and treatment of unhoused. But let me ask one follow-up on the rental policy. So for those policies that have been passed, the impacted tenant fund, the impacted tenant fund, and right to counsel, not tenant bill of rights. What do you see as like next steps to strengthen those things? How do we actually make those more impactful for more tenants in St. Louis?
So one of the things I'd like to implement is a fund also for landlords as they are turning over units, so they can turn over units faster, so people can get in those units. Because we have a lot of vacancy of units that can't be. People can't live in them because mold or outdated facilities or whatever is going on with that unit. And so we have to, I feel like the city of St. Louis has to be more helpful in helping our landlords turn their units around to make them available for people as well.
So is that like a fund for like minor repairs and things like that?
Minor repairs, yeah. And then also, I think that we oftentimes find ourselves having to help when a large building goes into disrepair, and nowhere was that more evident when the Heritage House and the pipes broke, and we had to help all of those seniors find new housing. And I don't know if that building's ever going to open again, but it didn't. It lacked the continual maintenance that needed to happen in order to prevent that from happening. And there are other buildings around the city where this same thing is happening. So we need to be more aggressive and hold those property owners accountable, hold those property managers accountable for making sure that they are providing livable facilities that are quality livable facilities, because I think it's shameful when they don't provide the services that our people deserve to live in safe, affordable housing that isn't leaking or doesn't have mold, or where all of the facilities are working and the appliances are working.
So let's go where you were going before and shift into this conversation around homelessness and services for unhoused people in St. Louis. One of the areas of some conflict over the past several years has been around the disbanding of homeless encampments, and that has continued throughout the years. A number of homeless services providers have sort of raised many concerns with the displacement of people in those encampments. Do you support an unhoused Bill of Rights that would make it more difficult to remove people from encampments and would raise the expectations, the burden on the city to provide shelter and services before people can be removed from encampments.
No, I support making sure that we have enough housing for our people not to fall into homelessness to begin with. So just as I talked about before, we are shifting to a housing first model. So how are we providing permanent and supportive housing for people and where we have enough of that, not only in St. Louis, but in the region. So if someone finds themselves in a precarious position or vulnerable position in Jefferson County, then they can find services in Jefferson County and not be shipped all the way to the city, which further traumatizes them and may lead to other bad outcomes. So how do we as a region come together to make sure that that there is permanent supportive housing for people who find themselves in those positions?
If not in support of an unhoused Bill of Rights, can you what do you object to in the idea of an unhoused Bill of Rights as it's been proposed?
Well, I think where we found the compromise, especially with Alderwoman Saulnier's bill, is we were able to find a way to allow shelters to expand in a way that that people aren't always throwing their hands up, right? Because anytime you say shelter and it comes into a neighborhood, all of the NIMBYism starts, right? And I think that Alderwoman Saulnier's bill, which we worked with her a lot on to expand shelters, is a healthy compromise.
So this last question, before we give you sort of closing remarks space, is about reparations. So the city appointed a reparations commission that went through an 18-month community engagement process and released a final report with recommendations. Have you read the report, and do you have any plans around the report's recommendations?
I have skimmed through the report, and I know that, for example, direct payments is unconstitutional through Missouri law. And we found that when we did the Guaranteed Basic Income program, we got sued for it and had to shift to a private funder for the rest of the funds for that program. But I do believe that on some of the recommendations, especially when it comes to equitable economic development and making sure that we are repairing the harms that have been done to North St. Louis and parts of South St. Louis, we're well on our way to addressing a lot of that through our Economic Justice Action Plan.
Do you think there's anything that needs to be created to ensure that work around reparations continues in the areas that you think it is legal and advisable to do it? Possibly, because I won't always be here, and it won't, and this issue won't be as important to whoever comes after me. So just trying to figure out a mechanism to make sure that stays top of mind, to make sure that, whoever is in this seat pays attention to our communities, to making sure that investment continues to happen, that the repair of those past harms continues to happen. And I know that, was it Brandon Bosley filed a bill around it. I do think that we have to take a look at what that looks like on a more permanent basis, just to keep it top of mind for people that, this issue isn't going away. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Great.
Well, we've reached the end.
Yes, we have.
And we want to give you an opportunity to just address the public. Is there anything that you want to mention that we didn't ask you about today, or any closing thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
I would say the closing thoughts I want to share with your listeners is, it's as they listen to my opponents in this cycle, I would just ask them to be mindful that if changing a mayor every 4 years isn't going to lead to any progress. It's really easy to sit on the sidelines and complain and say that, well, they're not doing this and they're not doing that, when you have no idea how it works. Obviously, if I could, wave a magic wand and hire more people and fill these vacancies, I absolutely would. But there are things that are out of my control that stand in my way of being as effective as I'd like to be. And anybody who comes behind me is going to run into those same roadblocks and those same barriers. And I think that we have made significant progress in the last 4 years, and we would like to continue to make that progress, investing in communities that haven't seen investment in decades, making sure that people are safe in their neighborhoods, that when they call 911, they get the proper response to their problems, because we embed behavioral health professionals in our 911 center, and we're building a new one. We're building a new airport because we're a world-class city and we deserve a world-class airport, and we're expanding public transit. I have my public transit shirt on today. And all of these things will lead to a city that looks really different, I would say, in the next 3 to 5 years. And the investment is happening in St. Louis. There are companies that are looking to come here or that have planted roots here and replanted roots here. Downtown is not emptying, the sky is not falling. And there are, I would say St. Louis is on the cusp of some really transformational growth over the next several years. And buy your properties now, because it's going to be hard.
Yeah, already too high. But thank you for that.
Yes.
And thank you, Mayor Jones, for coming to Under the Arch for this special series on the candidates. So we just want to say thank you for spending the afternoon with us.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
luck on the campaign trail.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Time to close.
that was great. That was the last episode.
Yes, that was the last episode. Hopefully you've enjoyed these. Hopefully you've learned a lot about the candidates, their priorities, what they're running on, what they're offering to do for you out there. That was the goal of this.
That was the goal. And I just want to remind folks that the election is March 4th. This March election is an approval voting process, which means you can vote for multiple candidates that you approve to go into the runoff. The top 2 vote getters across these 4 candidates will then go into a runoff for the April election. So do your research. Mm-hmm. Make sure you know where to vote, when you can vote, and cast your ballot, because voter turnout for local elections is way too low, and we want to get those numbers up, which is why we're spending a lot of time making sure you know the importance of the function of the mayor and the board of aldermen in our communities and our daily lives, and that we make decisions about who leads our city.
Yeah, and just want to say again, as you heard us referencing during these conversations, all 4 of these mayoral candidates have campaign websites. Go there, read about them, read what they're saying. Google works pretty well. Do your research.
Scroll past the AI part.
Yeah, skip the AI.
Links.
Get to some people.
Links.
Hopefully this is just part of your process in learning about these candidates and informing your vote.
Yeah, let's run the credits. We want to thank our team. We want to thank Johnny, Brittany, Z, Carissa. We want to thank the new members of our team, the Church Production Studios,
Church Productions,
who have been the best host
in the building, literally.
Like maybe this will be something we think about doing again. But
we told them not to get used to it. Don't be promising them.
I said maybe.
Now. Okay.
Just like I said, maybe it was a season 6. Maybe we'll have more video episodes. But for sure, we'll be back with the rest of season 6 on Under the Arch, only in your ear where you find your podcast. Please share this episode and stay tuned for more.
See you soon.
Come so far, so hard to go.